Okay, thank you. One other question. Major criticism in some quarters of Dodd-Frank has been the regulatory burden that it has placed on small banks in particular. There's a legislative initiative that would raise the $500 billion to $250 billion, the regulatory threshold for heightened oversight by the Federal Reserve. Do you agree that overly burdensome regulations has hindered particularly small bank lending to the effect of contributing to maybe the slowness of that economic recovery that we've both talked about from the last recession?
Well, I do agree that community banks face substantial burdens, regulatory burdens, and it's very appropriate for the Fed and other banking regulators to look for ways to reduce the compliance burdens that they face. We are I know we meet with many community bankers and are very aware of concerns about this. We are really focused on trying to tailor our supervision so that we find ways to reduce regulatory burdens. We have put into effect a number of changes that reduce reporting requirements, and recently have a simplified capital proposal that we think should address some of the concerns. But we have long been on record as favoring some increase in the $10 and $50 billion asset thresholds that are incorporated into Dodd-Frank. In particular, we think that the Volcker rule and incentive compensation are things that should not apply to smaller, less complex banks. And we do think an increase in those thresholds would assist us in appropriately tailoring our regulations. We do think it's important that the Fed retain authority to impose enhanced prudential standards on banking firms, particularly in the $100 to $250 billion total asset range, both for safety and soundness and financial stability concerns. And in particular, stress testing, we think is a particularly important component of our safety and soundness approach, and do think it's appropriate for that to apply to banks, let's say, over the $100 billion threshold.
I want to ask you about regulation. I think that the Fed has generally done a good job under your leadership in writing regulations that have strengthened the safety and soundness of our financial institutions. But there have been discussions in Congress right now about tailoring these regulations that were put in place after the financial crisis. And as you know, the Senate Chairman Crapo has introduced bipartisan legislation on regulatory relief, a major package for banks. Some people want to go further than this and really roll back Dodd-Frank. So I have two questions. First, do you think it is a good idea to roll back Dodd-Frank in this post-crisis regulatory time? And secondly, what do you think of Chairman Crapo's regulatory relief package? Do you think it goes too far, or do you think it strikes the right balance?
Well, let me start with the first question about rolling back Dodd-Frank. I think that Dodd-Frank provided an excellent roadmap to a series of changes that have led to a far safer and sounder banking system, and one that has been able, over the last 10 years, there have been stresses of all sorts that have hit the U.S. financial system, sometimes emanating from abroad, and it's proven resilient and able to support good growth and a strong labor market. And core reforms include more and higher quality capital, more liquidity, stress testing, which I think is very important, and resolution planning. So if a systemic firm were to fail, that we would have the tools to be able to deal with it without its imposing such costs on the economy. And I would not want to see those things rolled back. I think it would be very dangerous to do so. That said, do believe it's appropriate to tailor regulations to the systemic footprint of a financial institution. And so tailoring is an important principle. And we've long indicated that we would be supportive of raising some of the thresholds incorporated into Dodd-Frank, in particular the $10 billion and $250 billion thresholds. And that would give us more ability to tailor to the systemic footprint of particular firms. Particularly important to us is having the continued ability to impose enhanced prudential standards on a firm that might fall under a new threshold if we thought it was justified by safety and soundness or financial stability concerns. So the legislation that's been proposed, I haven't had a chance to study every detail of it, but I would say it generally incorporates those principles and is a move in a direction that we think would be good in enabling us to appropriately tailor our supervision.